Psalm 63 and verse 6. And then Psalms 119. Verse 148. Somebody want to read that? Okay. And then let's flip back to Psalms 4 and verse 4. And then Psalms 42 and verse 8. Go ahead. And then Psalms 119:55. So here we see the psalmist kind of conveying a lot of those thoughts, right, of meditating and focusing on God when laying in bed at night, and kind of focusing on God as we kind of wrap up the day. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with the peace, the tranquility of, being able to lay ourselves down to bed at night, knowing that can meditate on God, think about godly things, and then wake up the next morning, Lord willing, with kind of a fresh mind, a fresh conscience. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, and honestly, back to my knee-jerk reaction about the lesson, just in general, I oftentimes feel like we go all day long, and as we lay down before we go to bed at night, it almost feels like giving God just what's left over, right? It's like, this is all the gas I got left in the tank. How many of us have probably fallen asleep saying a prayer at night while laying in bed? I've done that. I'm sure many of us have done that. And so I do think there's a big benefit of focusing on God throughout the day. But as the psalmist writes about here, and as we talk about drawing near to God, it's about creating that pure heart before we lay down and go to sleep, and as we approach God's throne. So what are some things that we can do at the end of each day to help us draw closer to God? Any thoughts?
Technology can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing.
Yes.
And I'm very guilty of it, with the phone and the iPad and TV and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, that's what you do. And you just, for lack of a better word, you just kind of go brain dead. And how much time
So turning off the electronic devices certainly would be a good way. What are some other thoughts? Pray. Study. For sure. I mean, I think all spending time in prayer and study is certainly a good way. Who has another idea?
Psalms chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 is the main thought. And you see there the progression of sin. You don't think about, dwell upon the progression of sin. You don't stand with sinners. You don't walk in their way. And you have to be separate and apart from the ways of the world to the ways of God. And you don't meditate upon the ways of God, not the ways of God.
Right. So we have to be in the world, right? Our secular jobs are probably in the world. We're around people that are not Christians all day long. And certainly to your point, we shouldn't long for those things, or we shouldn't meditate on those things, but we should be focused on God. And certainly as we come home before we go to bed, it's certainly an excellent time to focus on that.
God's word is going to direct us in the right direction.
Correct. Yep. Any other thoughts?
Greg, we can use technology to watch YouTube lessons and sermons from other people instead of TV.
It's a curse and a gift all at the same time, right? I think we all learned that during the pandemic, right? It opened up a lot of avenues and doors that we maybe didn't have in the past.
Using the comment in the evening, Lee goes to sleep in 2.6 seconds, I go to sleep in 2.8 hours. That you could use that time a lot of times to reflect on your day and set your mind to do better the next. So you can use that quiet time, that time at night, because you may not be there yet with all the kids, you probably get your head to the pillow and they're gone. But someday, when you have exhausted yourself with kids, it's a good time to use at night to reflect and do better.
Well, if I'm being honest, my problem has always been I can't stop thinking. And I'm just constantly all the time thinking about something, about work, about what I need to do, that kind of thing. And so for me, it's always been a struggle of trying to kind of just sit down and focus on one thing rather than just having that mind spinning all night long. Any other thoughts?
Being awake at night and not sleeping, my first thought goes to worry about things. How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to deal with the tax? And the Bible addresses the sin of worry, but maybe the emphasis the Bible places on losing sleep over worry, and then the emphasis the Bible places on drawing closer to God in the evening hours. Maybe the solution to worry is to take our focus off the mundane task of this life and put it on God. And so if I'm up at night, out of all the things I could be thinking about God's the best thing I can do. And that will alleviate the stress that's maybe keeping me awake from the end.
Sure. Absolutely. Correct.
People we associate with that buddy up, they're walking in darkness, they won't influence us.
And honestly, Mr. Raymond, I think that's why Christian camps and youth retreats and mission trips and those types of things, gospel meetings, I think that's why there's such a big benefit to those types of activities, is because we're surrounded more than just the couple times a week that we meet here for services with Christians and being together with one another. So I do want to explore this idea of spending time with God throughout the day. And I'm really curious to learn from some of you all, what are some things that you do for yourself to spend time with God, maybe throughout the day? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? Like, what are some habits that you all have to try to clear your mind of the day and kind of focus on God? I will tell you that when I worked at Denso, I always took a lunch break, partly to get away from the craziness of that company, but also I would just go sit in my truck, and sometimes I'd read my Bible and say a little prayer just to kind of clear my mind, think about things of the day. I have a little bit more freedom to do that throughout the day now than what I used to have. But what are some things that you all do? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? What are your habits?
I listen to a lot of podcasts, Scattered Abroad Network, GBN, those type of things. And I usually do that in the mornings whenever I'm getting ready, turn it on in the background. And then I usually finish it whenever I'm eating breakfast and drinking my coffee. And then at the end of the day, I remember seeing my mom at night. Dad would go to bed. He was a farmer. He went to bed early. And so she would sit, she'd turn TV off, and she'd lay her Bible on her lap, and she would read her Bible every night. And I remember seeing that, and I started that habit when my kids were little. And I still do that. I'll read my Bible some every night. So, and then during tax season, a lot of times I'll try to take a break, and I'll try to catch part of a podcast during lunch, or or a sermon, something like that, just to kind of get me refocused back, so I can face the rest of the day.
Yeah. Chip?
It sounds kind of stupid when I say it out loud, but every morning before I read, I try to read at least a chapter before I go to work, but I will clean my glasses before I do that, and that's just a marker for me to remember that I'm not just sitting there, okay, I need to read a chapter to get out of here. It's, I need to be in what I'm doing when I'm doing that, so that I can be in, so that I can properly be in everything else that I'm doing.
Right.
Sometimes I will ask God for zeal and motivation, and then when he talked about his glasses, that reminded me, I'll clean my room.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just start cleaning, and
Sure.
then get the zeal and my best.
Yeah. Good. Go ahead. Go.
I am thankful all during the entire day. I start out my day asking for help to get through the day, because sometimes I have trouble focusing. Sometimes I'm so tired with being in front of the computer all day long, working. But I thank him all during the day. And if I need something in the middle of the day, I ask for it. But thanking him puts my focus right where it needs to be. And it's just every time there's something that I can be grateful for. And it's not a formal, I just say thank you, Lord. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you for helping me.
Sure.
I'll write my prayers.
Okay.
It's kind of a prayer / letter, because if I pray the Lord comes to my mind, hear all, things, but I have a small notebook in my desk drawer.
I assume we had at least one journaler in here. I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce that, but
I like to reflect on my life, and I like to reflect on the blessings that the Lord has bestowed upon me and my family. So, as the lady up front said, I'm constantly thanking the Lord, being grateful and thankful throughout the day.
Sure.
And I like to look around and see where I could have been versus where I am. And because music is my world, I listen to a lot of spiritual music. And I can't thank him enough.
Anyone else?
Like a talk time for me, that's like driving time is a good time to reflect and meditate. Usually during the day when you're at work, everything's crazy. You got a little bit of time sitting in the car, it's just you got two things to do, then you can meditate
many listen to the Bible being read rather than music? Several of you? Okay. Someone else had, yeah.
You brought it up about you. I have the same problem you do. I can't turn my mind off. It's, and as a business owner, I think you understand what I'm talking about. You're constantly thinking about what I gotta get done tomorrow. And when I come home, even laying there at midnight, I'm thinking about what I gotta get done tomorrow. How do you stop that?
Well, for me, I think about Luke chapter 5 and verse 16. And this is talking about Jesus. He says, so he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. I find for me personally, I have to completely pull away and detach from everything else. I'm the type of person, I get very tunnel vision. If I'm at work and I'm focused on something, I can't think about anything else but that task or that topic. And so I literally have to just withdraw myself to be able to kind of focus on God and that kind of thing.
12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
When you should be asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that problem?
Sometimes. It's happening more and more here lately as I get older, but I think that's probably more Annie's problem than my problem, to be honest with you. But let's look at Daniel chapter 6. I think everybody knows this story, right? Daniel chapter 6 and verse verse 10. So everybody knows the story, right? They were jealous of Daniel. They had the king sign a decree basically saying that they were no longer allowed to, in verse 7, no longer, that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions, right? So what do we read in verse 10? Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. How many of us, we've talked about several things, but how many of us have a custom where it's just every day? That's what we do. This is the time that I have. It is like clockwork every morning, every afternoon, in the evening, where I'm stopping everything I do and I'm focusing on God. Several of us, I'd say.
I have noticed that Phyllis and I would read the Bible every morning and read a chapter or two, and we really didn't get anything out of that. Lately, we've been studying every verse, and we'll go over that verse and look at the words that are being used and study, and we get so much more out of that than we do just reading. And because you're just going through the motion. You think you're doing a Bible study and you're just reading, and
Right.
you're not getting anything out of it.
Where I've found it's been the most beneficial for me to just sit down and just read is when I've kind of gotten out of whatever habit I've been in, right? We've got 4 kids. It's kind of crazy at times. And there's no day that seems to be the same. So for me, sometimes it's just a matter of just sitting down and saying, I'm just going to read and kind of focus on whatever I'm reading that morning. And I think that kind of gets us back into the habit where we can do some of that more study as you're talking about. But yeah, that's a good point. Any other thoughts?
Insight from the comments being made. It seems like a lot of these have in common one central truth, and it's the same with my experience as well. And that is when I find the time, or when I can make the time, when I'm not distracted, when I don't have other things on my mind. We live in a world where we have all these tasks and all these things we've got to be concerned with, no doubt. The parable of the soils or the parable of the so Jesus famously said that we may have the Word of God in our heart, but oftentimes it's the cares and riches of this world that choke out that Word. And knowing that we live in a world full of cares and full of riches and distractions, I think you're hitting on something very important by going back to Daniel. Because what did Daniel do? He purposed 3 specific times in his day that were, I almost get the impression, I think we pretty much do get the impression, that he would not compromise those. His whole life revolved around those important occasions. And what were those important occasions? It was God first. God is the priority. And if we're just going to kind of find it when we can, which I know a lot of us do, myself included, then don't be surprised if at the end of the day we're so tired that we don't have the energy to put into it because we're working and so distracted. So prioritizing, we're going to talk about this morning about going into a prayer closet to pray, the idea of going in secret. If we have a place and a time and a habit set aside to pray, like cleaning your glasses, morning coffee, whatever it is, then that becomes routine, but it can still be meaningful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't mean to steal your thunder this morning. I'm sorry. But yeah, I'd agree with those thoughts completely. Any other thoughts before we move on?
I just, I'm very time management oriented for work. I just set calendar notifications. This is just me being me, but for like 10, 12, and 2, and then my schedule gets blocked off for that, even though I'm at a flexible schedule. And then I have to set it in about 5 minutes later. A lot of times I'll hit the don't disturb notification, so it'll hit me again, and so it kind of makes me that I know that at that time I'll take a few minutes to do whatever I need to do, and that actually makes me work a little bit better because I've had a break anyway. So.
Sure. Any other thoughts? Let's look at Luke. Luke, 22. We're going to read Christ's prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Luke 22, verse 39 through 46. Coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives as he was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. And he knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Arise, pray, lest you enter into temptation." So really what I wanted to get from this scripture was kind of the anxiety that Jesus was dealing with as he prepared for his death. And obviously the weight of the world was on him at that moment in time. So much so that in 44 we read that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And I know there's times in our lives where certainly the prayers look a lot different, right? There's a lot of times where our prayers are praying for others and praying and thanksgiving and supplication to God, right? And then there's other times in our lives where there's so much going on, or maybe we feel like the world is coming down on us so much that prayer looks different, that we raise to God. And so I want to talk just a few minutes, and we'll kind of start to wrap up, but I want to talk just maybe a few minutes about kind of our attitude or disposition we should have when we are drawing nearer to God. So let's look at 1 Peter 5 and verse 7. I think someone has already quoted that one already, but we'll look at it. First Peter 5 and verse 7. Casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. And I would like for us to look at Psalms chapter 61, because I feel like this psalm is a goes well with that passage, Psalm 61, about casting all your care on him. Psalm 61, hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth I will cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. For you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. You will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations. He shall abide before God forever. O prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. So I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. I thought those words were very powerful when thinking about casting all your cares on him, about how when your heart is overwhelmed, lead me to a rock that is higher than I will trust in the shelter of your wings. And I think the Psalms have there's a lot of good Psalms to go to, especially when we're dealing with different things in life. Matthew 6 and verse 34. Somebody want to read that? Yeah, and I think TJ touched on that briefly earlier this morning about how we're not to worry about tomorrow. And then Ephesians 5 and verse 20. So certainly we read here about just some different, how our attitude or our disposition is supposed to be when we approach God in that manner. Any thoughts related to that? Go ahead. Sorry.
I try to be conscious later in life now to be more thankful in my prayer life than have requests. It seems like I'm always praying when something's wrong, when something's going bad. It's like I'm always just, having petitions of the Lord. Like, let me try to just have some prayer. Just be thankful. Try to be thankful more than and grateful more than I request.
Right.
Sometimes I think, okay, today I'm just going to pray for things and things. I'm not going to have to request for myself or anybody else. Just hey, everything's going pretty good, Lord, thanks.
I remember when I was at Freed, I actually had a professor that challenged us once just to sit down every once in a while and just pray a prayer of nothing but thanksgiving, not asking of God of anything, just praying a prayer, thanking him for the different things in your life. Sorry, that was another thought.
When you started out with Luke, and you went through the series of scriptures, it lets me realize and know that there's a lot of things in this world that we really don't want to do, or we're concerned about doing it. But as Jesus said, if it be your will, remove this cup from me. Mm-hmm. Let this cup be removed from me, brother. Mm-hmm. But not my will, but thy will. Mm-hmm. It's just to show that there's a lot of things that we don't want to do or go through, but we realize that this is something that we should do or must do, or we put our trust in the Lord that he will see us through.
Sure. Absolutely. And God answers prayers in his own times. And I think we all can probably attest to that throughout as we look back on each of our lives. Any other thoughts? So I guess my final concluding thought would be, this week, I'd like to challenge us to think about being more deliberate with spending time with God. If you don't have a habit, if you struggle to keep that habit, which is myself, really focus on coming up with that habit as we read about Daniel, and spending time with God, reflecting in prayer, and also spending time with Him and His Word, and just being more deliberate about trying to draw nearer to God and purify our hearts and cleanse ourselves from the world around us. Sorry, I had another thought and I lost it for a second there. But that would be my I think my takeaway from this lesson is for each of us to really reflect on that and try to spend time with God in prayer. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, we're done a little bit early, so thank you all.